Welcome in to another episode of my Dynasty Fantasy Football YouTube. We've got my 5 takeaway series today, every Monday from now until the NFL season, covering that week's slate for Dynasty. As always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's jump into my first takeaway. Brock Bowers is the Dynasty tight end 1. Of course, this isn't that surprising because he was one of the best tight end prospects ever and was drafted 13th overall in the 2024 NFL draft. And he's dominated thus far, especially in week 2 with 9 catches, 98 yards on 9 targets. He also had 6 catches for 58 yards on 8 targets in week 1. He's erased Jacoby Myers and Michael Mayer from the target tree, becoming the clear secondary target to Devontae Adams. The craziest thing is that Bowers can still grow his role. He ran just 28 of 43 routes this week and only played 43 of 63 snaps, just 4 more than Mayer. Now, what do you do about this? I would say, if you can, buy high on Brock Bowers. If you could, I would easily send Sam Laporta or Trey McBride for Bowers. I know we've seen more from those two guys, but Bowers was an infinitely better prospect than the two. Not a little better, not a tiny bit better, way better. And he's already looks better now. So I'm buying it after 2 games. I've seen enough after 2 games. Bowers hasn't scored, which might make buying him possible. Still going to be hard, but it might be possible. If you can't buy him, though, just enjoy the shares you drafted. This is not a moment to sell Brock Bowers. I am fully confident that Brock Bowers is going to be an elite dynasty tight end for many years. Next up, Jaxon Smith-Njigba had a career game. He did. 12 catches for 117 yards on 16 targets. He led the team in catches and targets. Even better, his production did not come at the expense of DK Metcalf. Metcalf had 10 catches, 129 yards, and a touchdown on 14 targets. He actually outscored Smith-Njigba. And it all worked out well with 327 passing yards from Geno Smith, who has led the Seahawks to 2-0 start and looks really good. We're finally also getting what we wanted as dynasty managers, as Tyler Lockett vanished with 2 catches for 15 yards on 2 targets. I think they saw week 1 and they saw that the offense would have been better if they'd gone more to JSN's way. Lockett was 3rd in snaps and route participation, but as Ryan Grubb would be known to do, I mean, remember, he ran the Washington offense with Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, and Jalen McMillan. What happened there? 3 wide receivers were consistently involved. What did we have here? All 3 wide receivers, Lockett included, ran 42 or more routes on 48 total routes run. The pecking order of routes was Metcalf, Smith-Njigba, Lockett, but targets, Lockett, as you can see, only had 2, really didn't do anything. But if they're going to focus on getting all 3 wide receivers on the field consistently, there's room for 2 of them to be relevant every single week. And I think it's going to be Metcalf and Smith-Njigba. And Lockett might even be, a low-end wide receiver 4. He'll have better games than this. Now, what's the actionable move to me? It's going to be tough to buy JSN after the big game. And I still love DK Metcalf. But Geno Smith is buyable in Superflex leagues. The Seahawks are 2-0. Smith has looked excellent in Ryan Grubb's offense. He's under contract for 2025. It's actually reasonable for a quarterback, $38.5 million cap hit. But since that cap hit's a little high, he might earn an extension for 2026 to smooth that out a little bit. I would easily pay a 2025 second or even a little bit more to acquire Smith in Superflex leagues. Next up, Michael Pittman, scary dynasty asset. We have a big problem here, a big problem with Michael Pittman. He is not gelled in the Anthony Richardson offense, not at all. He has 15 targets through 2 weeks, which for Pittman is actually not that good, but just 7 catches for 52 yards. Alec Pierce has outproduced Pittman in both games. Even Ashton Doolin has more production than Pittman so far. The problem is that Richardson loves the deep ball, not good for Michael Pittman, but is overall an inaccurate quarterback, also bad for Michael Pittman. Pittman is not elite on the volume he receives. He's not elite per touch. So he must get high, accurate volume to be a great fantasy asset. He's getting neither of those things. Not high volume, not accurate volume. Worst of all, it's going to get even worse when Josh Downs returns in week 3. Downs was close to playing in week 2. He will play week 3. He'll lead into the target pie further. It's not going to help Pittman get insane levels of volume. Remember, Gardner Minshew is a lock-on quarterback. It helped Pittman last year because Minshew just throws to one guy. Anthony Richardson doesn't seem like that's the case. So I'm very nervous. Not that I'm interested in Downs, but it's only going to hurt Pittman even more. Now, what's the actionable move? Unfortunately, I think you're stuck with Pittman. I think you're stuck with him. I don't know how you're going to trade him because nobody's going to want him. But I don't believe for a second that Alec Pierce has overtaken Michael Pittman. Adonai Mitchell has been wide open on multiple long looks that Richardson has missed, which is not helping my view of Pittman or Pierce. And I don't think that the Colts will just bench him when Downs returns. They're going to go to a 4 wide receiver rotation, which will cost Alec Pierce some snaps. I'd take any third rounder for Pierce. If I'm not in on Pittman, I'm really not in on Alec Pierce, who I still think is the 4th most talented wide receiver on this team, despite what's happened so far. If you like my YouTube content, you should sign up for the Patreon. You get my rankings, access to the Discord, and ability to ask in advance questions for the YouTube videos. Tiers begin at just $6 a month and include all of that. If you want to know more about the Patreon, check out both of my why you should join the Patreon videos on the channel. They're on the homepage. I really appreciate everyone who signed up and any new patrons who join. I'm telling you, if you had signed up, you would have made a lot of great start sit decisions this week, a lot of great dynasty trades, a lot of great buy lows and sell highs after week 1. I'm here every day helping you win. It's 20 times better than the YouTube channel. This is a 15-minute encapsulation of my thoughts. I'm on there 24 hours a day. It can't compare. So please click the link and sign up for the Patreon. With that said, let's jump into our next player. So our next player kind of takeaway is Malik Nabers is elite. And I mean elite of the elite. He had 10 catches, 127 yards, and a touchdown on 18 targets. The wild thing is he could have been even better. He had a key drop near the end of the game and some missed looks and inaccurate passes from Daniel Jones. What a surprise. If Nabers even had a borderline competent quarterback like Sam Darnold, he'd be a wide receiver 1, mid wide receiver 1 weekly right now in start-sit ranks kind of thing. He had a 66.6% target share in week 2, 18 of 27 targets. That is wild. We don't see that ever. I mean, ever. That is a ridiculous level of volume. Wan'Dale Robinson fell back to just 4 targets after having 12 in week 1. Was a clear wide receiver 3 in routes run and snaps as Darius Slayton became the wide receiver 2. Robinson feels kind of like a week 1 mirage, but we now see what the Giants really want to do. Their offense will run through Malik Nabers and it'll run through Devin Singletary on the ground and nothing else. They don't want to involve anyone else. Now, what would I do? Unfortunately, getting Malik Nabers is going to be almost impossible, right? I mean, that's going to be almost impossible. Marvin Harrison Jr. scored 2 touchdowns this week, but he only had 8 targets. He'll get more attention, though, because he's on the Cardinals, scored 2 touchdowns. At this point, I've seen that Nabers is just as elite and may garner even more volume than Harrison Jr. If you can get a plus with Nabers for Marvin Harrison Jr., I would do it. Maybe you can't, but why not try it? I would easily take the surplus value with Nabers because they're identical to me at this stage. I have to toss up between Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Nabers. They are both elite dynasty assets. Now, last takeaway. Quentin Johnston scored 2 touchdowns. He did. He had a big game with 5 catches, 51 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 6 targets. He led the Chargers in all receiving categories. He also led in routes run and snaps by a wide margin. This was the best game of his career, which is not saying much because he's had very few good games in his career. Joshua Palmer's injury opened the door for a full role for Quentin Johnston and playing time for the backup wide receivers. Ladd McConkey had 2 catches for 26 yards on 4 targets. He was wide receiver 2 with Palmer hurting, but he played just 34 of 69 snaps, less than half of a share, which is not really what I wanted to see from Ladd McConkey. I was disappointed in him in this game, and he might be moving down a little bit in my ranks. But my actionable move here is to sell Quentin Johnston. This is your opportunity. He finally has had a good game in his career. 1 good game. Finally. I don't buy this. He was horrible and not bad, horrible as a rookie. The main problem is the lack of passing volume. The Chargers had 69 offensive snaps, but only 22 routes run. McConkey has been okay for 2 games. For a rookie, he's actually been pretty good. He'll continue to get more involved. And this team does not have its wide receiver 1. They will acquire that player in the 2025 offseason. We see that Josh Palmer is not it. He's a free agent after this year. They have Lad McConkey as their slot receiver. Quentin Johnston, hopefully, is their outside wide receiver 2. And they need that X receiver, that real number 1 style receiver, whether that could be T. Higgins as a free agent, a first-round wide receiver in the draft. We know there are many of those. They'll be in a much better situation. Players who were as bad as Quentin Johnston as rookies never, ever, ever succeed. I would still take any 25-second. Maybe you could get more. But to me, this is a sell high moment. I don't find it to be sustainable for so many reasons. So I'm out on Quentin Johnston. I would sell right now while you still can. Now, there's a lot of NFL news, but I think there are 2 stories that are worth covering separately. So we're going to get into each of those. Number 1, Isiah Pacheco's fibula fracture. This is a devastating injury to Pacheco. And I don't want, some people are going to say, I guarantee you I'm going to see this comment. I'm so happy Tyler told me to fade Isiah Pacheco. I didn't predict that he would get hurt. I did not predict that. But what I do always say is with these running backs that do not have contracts or first-round draft capital, their value is very vulnerable because their jobs are vulnerable. If anything bad happens, they can be replaced, and the team has no investment. So they are vulnerable to a stretch of poor play. They can be replaced. An injury, they can be replaced. Whatever it is, another guy comes up, they can be replaced. So that's why I'm very hesitant to buy in on these low draft capital guys like Pacheco. We don't know how long Pacheco's going to miss. It's going to be at least 6 weeks, if not more. So to break down what everyone's talking about, Carson Steele versus Samaje Perine. They play complementary roles in the offense. In week 2, Steele outsnapped Perine 14-9. Neither was that involved. Steele had 7 carries for 24 yards, but fumbled. Perine had 1 catch for 3 yards with no carries. You have to roster both players in Dynasty, but the Chiefs are going to add another running back to further complicate the backfield. They have to. You can't rely on these 2 guys. So the actionable move is to sell both of them. I'm really not that interested. Of course, in adding them, I would, but I'm not interested in starting either of these players next week. Steele would have to fall into the end zone, maybe twice, and Perine would have to get targets against Worthy, Rice, and Kelsey. I would try to get as much as you can. I'd take any third for Perine. For Steele, maybe 2/3 would be ideal, but I'd take a third and a fourth if I had to. I'm not that interested in these running backs. I do not believe either one has long-term value at all. The Panthers benched Bryce Young, which is absolutely wild to me. A number 1 overall pick benched after 2 games in his second year. But he's been horrible. In 2023, he had 59.8% completion, 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 5.5 yards per attempt, 179.8 yards per game. Somehow this year, he's been even worse. 55.4% completion, no touchdowns, 3 picks, 4.4 yards per attempt, 122.5 yards a game. Even worse after adding Deontay Johnson with Dave Canales. I think this is the end of Young's career as a starter. If you're going to do something, I would add Andy Dalton off waivers. We must add all starting quarterbacks in Superflex leagues. He has no dynasty value, but maybe he'll be a spot starter in Superflex. There are worse players to add. You have to add him off waivers. There's really no choice at this point. Now, I have a couple of Patreon questions, so let's get into those. Now, has your perspective on Caleb Williams changed for better or for worse from week 1 to 2? It's funny we're talking about him right after Bryce Young. I'd say maybe a bit worse. Nothing long-term. I don't like Shane Waldron as offensive coordinator. I don't like Matty Eberflus as a head coach, but Williams is a buy low to me. I can see the talent there. It's not like Bryce Young, who's always looked terrible. He was already a lot better from week 1 to week 2. Keenan Allen was out. Rome Odunze shouldn't have played. The offensive line was absolutely horrible. My panic level with Caleb Williams is not very high. And lastly, what's your best buy low player? To me, it's still Chris Olave. The Saints offense looked amazing. Olave had 4 catches, 81 yards on 6 targets, 40% target share. He was tackled on the 1 on a play. If he scored that touchdown, you wouldn't be able to buy him. The Saints will not have 39 carries compared to 11 completions in every single game. So I'm still in on Olave. Now, if you like the video, make sure to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. As always, the best way to support the channel is to subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notifications bell so you can be notified about all my exciting content as it drops. Of course, if you want my best fantasy football advice, it's available on the Patreon. Dynasty, Start Sit, Redraft, and more. And every sign up helps support my independent content. But once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all